Hello, everyone, and thank you again for joining us for another wonderful Prides podcast series. We've got Daniel Ensley here today. So before we get started, Daniel, please introduce yourself, share your pronouns, and tell our audience a little about who you are and the important work that you do.
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name is Daniel Ensley. I use he or they pronouns. I'm the Director of Development and Partnerships with Oasis Youth Center in Tacoma, Washington. I've been here at Oasis for 7 years. I started doing direct services in programs and then transitioned about 2 years ago into development and fundraising. But throughout my time, I've been our lead trainer. So I go and help folks learn a little bit more about the LGBTQ community and how to be responsive and affirming. Yeah.
Great. So just a little plug. Thank you for that, Daniel. Tell us a little bit more about the Oasis Youth Center.
Yeah, Oasis Youth Center is the only LGBTQ youth center in Pierce County, Washington. We serve folks who are 11 to 24. We have a separate program for our middle school age, 11 to 14, and then our other programs are open to the 14 to 24 age range. We're open 6 days a week, and we mostly focus our programming around leadership development, advocacy, and prevention work. And prevention is multi-pronged, whether that's substance use prevention, infectious disease prevention, as well as violence prevention. So,
Yeah, a lot of important work. So thank you. And thank you, Oasis Youth Center. You know, I did have the opportunity to review your presentation, and it was wonderful for me to, be part of some of those learnings and conversations. And to your point, a lot of the things that you do focuses on members of the LGBTQ plus community.
mhm.
Yeah, there are many people who don't know of that community, are very limited. So why is it important for service providers or anyone who does work with individuals with disabilities to really grasp it, embrace it? Why is it so important for them to understand what it is, what it means to work with and support members of that community, especially the demographic that you serve or support, that specific age range?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the biggest thing for folks to take away about why it's important to be aware of the community and how to support folks is that our identities, our intersectional identities, impact the way that we move through the world, whether we're navigating healthcare systems, whether we're going to a restaurant, if we're going on a date, whatever it is in our work, especially. And so it's really important for folks to be aware of identity and how that impacts our experiences, especially when supporting communities that, have other marginalized identities, including folks with disabilities. So,
Yeah. Thank you for that, Daniel. To the point of the work that you do, what would you say are some of the maybe different conversations or different complexities of the conversations for adults who identify as as part of the LGBTQ plus community, and then working with youth? Are there differences, and if so, what are they?
yeah, I mean, I would say there's differences, but just in the way that everyone's experience is a little different. A lot of times with younger folks, the main differences are around their personal autonomy and agency. And so younger folks, often have to rely on families and households and may not be able to express themselves fully in certain spaces. Whereas adults, sometimes have a little bit more freedom to do so.
Yeah.
But I would say, there are no two queer folks alike, just like there's no two people alike. And so experiences certainly vary. And it's just about, really figuring out how you can best support someone. But certainly, ageism and things like that come into play when you're working with younger folks compared to older folks. So,
Yeah. And especially you add the conversation of disabilities to that. And I love how you talk about autonomy and agency, and it goes back to, the concept and movement around self-determination and how we continue to provide that from that lens. One of the things that what I was struck by this, and again, that when we people who do this work and people who understand this work and all the different kind of pieces of vocabulary that you shared in your presentation, which was very thorough and very enlightening. But for many people who don't work in that space, that's a lot of new information. And it's a lot of information to remember, navigate, or to your point, individualize and be, oh, this is this person, a they? What does this mean? What is this person's? And so for someone who's not as versed or comfortable, and there's some uncomfortable conversations and spaces in this, what would you say are some tips for people to navigate all of those, different things, but also very important pieces of vocabulary and understanding?
Yeah, absolutely. It's always a big conversation when we talk about the vocabulary and language used in the queer community, because I shared in my presentation just a fraction of identities. And if it was an exhaustive presentation, it would be several hours long, probably
Yeah.
several days to explore all of them. But I think one of the things that I try to really highlight when I do these training sessions is that when someone is sharing with you a part of their identity, it's okay if you don't even fully understand what that means. It's more about what is this person sharing with me? Why is it important to them? And it's important to know, is it appropriate to ask more questions with this individual, depending on the relationship you have? But I think there's a lot of good that can come from just saying, I'm not as familiar with that. Would you mind telling me what that means to you?
Yeah.
Because my understanding of language, especially in the context of this training, is that we are all trying to articulate our uniquely human experience to someone else. And language, falls short of that sometimes. You can't fully express your experience with language sometimes. And so part of why there's so many terms is because we're still trying to get a little bit closer to what my experience is, so that maybe I can find community, understanding, relationship to other people. And so I think if we remember that it's less about, how does this label fit into somebody else? Or how can I put this person into this box of a label? And more about how can I further understand them, and why it's important to them that they're sharing that with me.
Yeah. And thank you for that. And I think you answered some of this of what my next question is, but if you can kind of, dive into that a little bit. There are people who want to do right, well-intentioned people, and they are nervous, afraid, or just what are some advice you could give to say for people who, like you said, don't want to make a mistake, are afraid of leaning into that space because of that. They don't want to cause harm. They don't want to be seen as the bad guy, right? What are some advice or some maybe ideas you could provide for someone who's still just in that space?
Yeah, I would say before you ask someone a question, especially if it's related to a person's identity, whether that's in the queer community or maybe a disability someone has, ask yourself, how would I feel if someone asked me this? Right?
Right.
On the level of relationship you have with this person, would that be kind of uncomfortable for you? Right? And another thing is that if you want to have that conversation, a way to make it a little, more approachable for folks is maybe to start with yourself and say, I'd like to share that this is a part of my identity and
Mm.
this is why it's important to me. If you feel comfortable, I'd love to learn more about your experience so I can understand you a little more, right? So it helps when you start with yourself because you're, kind of offering that vulnerability and openness, and genuine authenticity first. And so I think that
Yeah.
makes it just more generative and more open for the other person to reciprocate if they'd like to.
I love that. And I love that use. I mean, I love that word authenticity because it creates that space invitation right away. So, Daniel, you talked a lot in your presentation about language and how We've talked about in this work, there's a lot of acronyms and how language has evolved. Like it used to be the gay and lesbian population, and then we added, included, and invited the bisexual population, and now it is LGBTQ plus, LGBTQIA plus, and that's evolved. So why do you think it's so important for language to evolve like that in this space?
Yeah, I mean, evolution is a part of everything in life. And as we grow and change as humans and communities, it's important that our language follows suit. We didn't have the word selfie before we needed it. There's a new word every year that's kind of championed as the word of the year. And so as we come to understand things more and grow more, it only makes sense that our language and communication does as well.
Yeah, because we have to be intentional about it too. I think, would you agree, Daniel, about saying we're not doing that to be the flavor of the month, right? It's not the next flavor of bagel that's coming out, but to honor and respect who we're inviting into that space. I love that. Um, we talked about authenticity earlier, and again, that's a powerful word. What would you say, and for people who find themselves, whether they're working with a service provider or an employment setting or in this work, where they haven't felt comfortable for various reasons to be their authentic self, how would you help support someone to find that place of authenticity?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think feeling like you have the space to be who you are authentically is so important in in every space, but especially in work. And unfortunately, it's not something that is a reality for a lot of people based on experiences they may have had. I would say my encouragement to you, if that's maybe how you're feeling, is that there are people out there who are going to accept and celebrate you. And it doesn't have to be, a big show. You don't have to proclaim to the entire office, a part of your identity and kind of have that coming out experience. But maybe see if you have someone, just even one person that you work alongside or collaborate with and say, this is a part of who I am and it's really important to me. And I want to share that with you and just see what community builds, right? I know some folks have started affinity groups within their workplace to make sure that there's that community, but I would say just start with one person or find a group even outside of work, um, and see how other folks have kind of navigated that experience, because you're not alone in that. It can be challenging. So I would say just seek out community, and share in the ways that you feel comfortable.
And to kind of continue on that along those same lines or even amplify that conversation, what are some ways, along with some of the things you already shared, Daniel, for members of the LGBTQIA plus community to be stronger advocates for themselves to so that they can help create that? So what are other things around those sense of advocacy, self-advocacy, and strengthening that for individuals themselves?
Yeah, I would say, you know, f- I think a lot of times people feel like their queerness, especially, is the thing that becomes the only thing that matters to other people. Um, and so there's an inclination sometimes to be a little more protective of that because you don't want to be judged or perceived a certain way based on an aspect of your identity. But I would say think about the ways in which your voice can elevate that community experience, that experience that maybe no one else at the table is sharing, and how it's so important to have it be a part of conversations, right? This idea of if there's not someone at the table, right, then make a new table. right? Make sure that your voice and your experiences are being heard. And if you don't feel comfortable specifically bringing them in, maybe see how you can bring another voice in, right? Invite people to the table that maybe have a little more comfortability around sharing and being that advocate and loud voice, if that's not who you are, right? Just look for those voices and how you can help them be elevated.
Yeah, fantastic. Build and invite. Daniel, we don't have much time left, but before we go, is there anything else you would like to share with our listeners today? Something that we haven't covered or something you just say, here is, words of wisdom or words of support from Daniel Ensley.
Yeah, I would just say that right now, the world is really scary for a lot of
Yeah.
people, and especially our queer youth. As we talked about, right? Young folks often don't have a lot of agency, and feeling like the world is trying to take away your rights and your protections makes that all the more scary. And so I would really encourage folks to seek out organizations that are doing work that you're passionate about, organizations like Oasis that support queer youth, and see how you can contribute and make sure that those resources continue to exist, because it's more important than ever that places like Oasis exist to encourage youth, to support them, to give them experiences that bring queer joy in a world that's really trying to erase that.
Yeah. And thank you. Yeah, and I agree. Community right now, community is always important, but right now is where we find solidarity, we find comfort, and we find strength in our spaces. Daniel, before we go, how can people connect with you and learn more about you and your work, or even the work of Oasis Youth Center?
Yeah, oasisyouthcenter.org is our website. We're on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, etc. We'll kind of see if that shifts with anything. But you can also reach out to our main email. It's just oasisyouthcenter.org. If you want to connect with me directly and chat more about anything in this podcast or the presentation, my email is Daniel at oasisyouthcenter.org. And I would love to connect to folks and continue to share information and find community.
Fantastic. Well, Daniel, thank you so much for the time today. Thank you for being your authentic self and sharing that. And thank you for being a part of the conversation, the work. Uh, we are all part of this together. And so, for everyone listening, please have a great rest of your day or your week or wherever time you're listening to this, and be kind to yourself and to others. Take care.
Thank you.